Flatlandia, Chapter 8, Flat Earth PhD Hoax in Tunisia, Planted PhD Paper, A Witch Hunt, out of University of Sfax. Purportedly, whilst the world was spinning along quietly, a young female researcher endeavored to say otherwise. A shitty misspelled 6-page rough draft of a PhD engenders the condemnation of the Tunisian Astronomical Society, the University of Sfax, the Secretary General for the Tunisian Ministry of Higher Education, the editor of the daily newspaper Al Maghrab, and an op-ed by an astrophysicist who formerly worked for NASA. Is such activity warranted? Doesn't this seem a bit overreactionary? Is it possible the reaction is the desired imprint of this narrative? Let's find out. Reports have come in that a doctoral candidate named Amiri Karoubi within the Department of Geography, National Engineering School of Sfax at the University of Sfax, Tunisia, was working on a flat earth thesis under the wing of former deputy of the National Constituent Assembly, Professor Jamel Taour, whom recently presented her thesis entitled The Flat Earth Model, Arguments and Impacts on Climate and Paleoclimate Studies, which claims, quote, all the data and the physical religious arguments have made it possible to demonstrate the central position, the fixation, and the flattening of the surface of the Earth, and the revolution of the sun and moon around it. Jamel Taour, as mentioned, is the former director of the Constitution Assembly of Tunisia, the group that helped rewrite the constitution in Tunisia back in 2011. And he claimed his students' constitutional right to explore the idea, and defended her by saying it was only a rough draft. Despite the professor's point that the paper has not yet gone under review, he co-authored this 6-page preliminary results version, which was published back in August of 2016, Volume 4, Issue 8, in the Journal of Science and Technology, a disreputable publication, but which was only uploaded a mere 3 weeks ago on yumpu.com at the start of this whole media smear campaign. As of April 30th, 2017, it has 7,773 views. You see the number count here. The preliminary results paper itself is riddled with poor grammar, bad spelling, and seemingly intentional obfuscation and terseness. This flat earth thesis has allegedly been underway since 2011. However, the more we look into it, the more it appears to be fabricated, a shell paper created to generate a litany of public ignominy rooted in perpetuating scientism as oppositional to flat earth thinking across academia, science, and religion. This may be the Amira Karoubi in question that still remains to be confirmed. It is the only Amira Karoubi I found whom lives in Tunisia on Facebook. The student, Amira Karoubi, and alleged author of the thesis, has a paper-thin LinkedIn page, which basically only cites one area of study, geology, and mentions that she'd been studying at the University of Sfax since 2011. Moreover, her Facebook page, for some reason you have to be logged in to view her profile, didn't begin posting until November of 2016. 18 total, with a host of likes declared in November of 2010, which were characteristically fundamental. On November 19th, 2010, she liked the cause Pour supprimer le groupe Coran toilet paper, to delete the group Quran toilet paper roll, which seems kind of on the nose, doesn't it? Then on November 22nd, 2010, she liked a cause that wants to block a group that mocks the Islamic religion. You can follow this link and translate from Arabic to see that the group's name she wanted to block is atheist. Again, this is starting to look more like semiotic ideology painting, generating an anti-free speech fundamentalist type character, than the personality of a 20-something female flat earther on the internet. She was more than happy to post kissy faces and reply to other people's comments with lipstick, but if she was such a personality and believed the earth to be flat, especially religiously so, I imagine her work would be vocal, and you'd see evidence of her discussing it online. Instead, we get this character or person molding a sparse public disposition since 2010. 2 messages were sent to her personal Facebook page by Spiritual North, one in April 17th, one in June 2017, one in April of 2017, one in June of 2017, asking if she were the student whom authored the paper. No reply has been heard as of this publication date. It is prudent to point out that even if Amira Karoubi is a real student at the University of Sfax, though it appears that she is not, her full and real PhD paper is still nowhere to be found. The preliminary results versions appears a farce, and either her involvement or fictitious nature do not detract from any of the systematic anomalies surrounding the event of the dissemination of her alleged thesis and its treatment throughout Tunisia and beyond. Question: why, beginning in April of 2017, does Karoubi's paper magically inspire the fear of academia? Answer: well, according to an op-ed by Nidhal Gesem, a former postdoc researcher at the Goddard Space Center and current professor of physics and astronomy at the American University of Sharjah, Karoubi's rough draft was leaked, his quotes, to a former president of the Tunisian Astronomical Society, whom TAS, the Tunisian Astronomical Society, indicated was Hafed Ateb and provided a link to his bio. Ateb was present on April 2nd of 2017 when this began and challenged Professor Taour to, quote, broadcast a copy of the thesis, end quote, according to an article published on businessnews.com.tn. This is ironic because according to Gessem's article on April 10th, Ateb had been leaked a copy. So in other words, the guy that asked for the professor to produce a copy of the paper was the guy whom purportedly Nidal Gessem said had been leaked a paper. Gessem's op-ed states, quote, a copy of the thesis was leaked to the former president of the Tunisian Astronomical Association, who checked that it was not a hoax and then quickly rang the alarm by posting on Facebook the general conclusions of the thesis verbatim, end quote. First off, Gessem got the name of the Tunisian society incorrect. It's the Tunisian Astronomical Society, not association. That almost seemed to be an overt misdirection. We know this because they shared a press release with Spiritual North when asked about the issue. So the Tunisian Astronomical Society identified themselves as as the society referenced in Nidal Gessem's op-ed, by virtue of being asked about the question and responding with a press release pertaining to the issue to me, Spiritual North, when asked about the issue. Secondly, if you discovered a thesis that you wanted to quell, does it really seem logical to post large verbatim swaths of it on your social media? Back to the inciting drama, where Hafed Atib seems to be running lines with Jamel Taour in a pseudo-academic environment. The reference to running lines here is a theatrical or dramatical reference, where Hafed Ateb seems to be running lines with Jamel Taour in a pseudo-academic environment. Ateb asks Taour to, quote, broadcast a copy of the thesis, end quote, and Taour responds, quote, the title of the thesis already indicates the content. Of course, a good part of the thesis presents arguments that have nothing scientific, that the Earth is flat, without gravitation, fixed in space, and that the heliocentric model is erroneous, end quote. This seems a coy answer which is far more conciliatory than resistive. If someone cares to make an academic claim, contrary to 5 centuries of science, wouldn't the contents be more important than knowing the title and subject matter? It appears Professor Taour is happy to admit a good part of this thesis we can't read in its entirety doesn't have science which shows the Earth is flat, fixed, or that heliocentrism is false. If it doesn't have any science that proves those things, what's all the hullabaloo? Something isn't adding up here. Why is a professor presenting a paper on flat Earth in which he openly admits a large swath contains nothing scientific to show its main contentions? Why is the question being posed by Hafed Atib, whom was purportedly leaked a preliminary copy? Why does the preliminary results thesis read like scientific garbage? These questions begin to introduce the notion that there is collusion in generating a sculpted narrative around flat Earth and academia. The fuse has been lit, and the next day we hear the roar of the Secretary General of the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research of Tunisia, Fawzia Sharfi, whom said, "Where is our country going? Amira Karoubi, a student at ENIS, has been working since 2011 to prepare a thesis under the direction of Professor Jamel Taur to challenge Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and Einstein, arguing that they are chimeras," end quote. Here is another article which quotes more briefly from the above quote in its penultimate paragraph. Sharfi continues, "To challenge Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Einstein, arguing that they are chimeras. How has such work been accepted in the doctoral school since 2011? End quote, said Fawzia Sharfi. I think the answer is that it hasn't. Interestingly, although Sharfi is the Secretary General to the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research, she is cited here as a mere professor at the University of Tunisia. Relevant as background, Fawzia Sharfi gave a TED Talk back in 2014 entitled For a Scientific Revolution in Tunisia. Doubling down on April 3rd, just after this fuse was lit, the editor of the daily newspaper Al Maghreb, Zaid Krishain, whom was also a relevant player during the political unrest back in 2012, is quoted in this New York Times article to have said, according to this radio source, Zaid Krishain assures that if this thesis is supported, then it would represent greater scandal of the history of knowledge in Tunisia, end quote. Forgive some of the English, these are all translated from either French or Arabic. The day after that, on April 4th, 2017, businessnews.com.tn publishes that the Astronomical Society of Tunisia intervened with a statement on April 3rd, denouncing the thesis as religious claims and encouraging stronger scientific education, particularly related to where we are in the world in secondary education. The article added, quote, "For its part, the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research has, through an official letter sent to the University of Sfax, asked for justifications and clarifications in relation to the content of the thesis," end quote. This last quote sounds like hand-washing of a non-existent thesis. There is no press for these, quote, justifications and clarifications, end quote, they are merely alluding to. The main message of the sculpture so far seems to be, do not disagree with the founding fathers of science, or you will be the laughingstock of academia, the governmental establishment, and social news. Chokri Mamogli, appointed Secretary of State for Foreign Trade back in 2008, who now works as an academic specialist in management at the University of Sfax, said, quote, "It's unacceptable. It's inadmissible. The ignominy is reflected on the entire research community, on the Tunisian university, on the credibility of our diplomas, on the recruitment opportunities of our young people in foreign laboratories, and even on the country," end quote. As this story unravels, one begins to consider why this PhD may not even have existed. For one, because it is only evidenced by a shitty preliminary results draft published in that pay-to-play scientific journal, which interestingly was made public in April of 2017, on yumpu.com. For two, because Professor Taur refused Hafed Ateb's request to share it, and somewhat ironically, as he had already purportedly been leaked an early copy according to Gesam. For three, because the student, mind you a young woman in today's digital age, has virtually no digital imprint. Moreover, the only evidence which suggests she has been researching since 2011 is her LinkedIn page, which is easily falsifiable. And for four, Karoubi was not reported to have been present. Karoubi is the female student who's allegedly the author. And for four, Karoubi was not reported to have been present at the presentation of her paper, or anywhere else for that matter. These facts serve as consideration for the notion that Karoubi does not exist, And if she does, at the very least, that a full PhD thesis most likely was never written, but instead either her and this paper, or just this paper, are merely convenient shells functioning as academic fall points to allege the existence of some writing which has no voice to defend itself, for it has no genuine author, but which can then be slandered and derided publicly and abundantly. Taur unofficially presented the thesis on April 2nd of 2017, prior to it having undergone peer review or obtained doctoral approval. The strange purpose of presenting such an unsubstantiated paper was not touched on in all of the media that covered this event, as mentioned in this French blog, published on April 7th, which covers the story and links to a radio interview with Jamel Taur. Professor Taur, quote, almost had to apologize, end quote, because they came at him, quote, like a pack of dogs, end quote. Sounds more like a Shark Tank feeding frenzy than a session pertaining to academic and constitutional freedom. The story officially broke on April 3rd, the following day, 2017, just after this unofficial presentation, by an article published by Frida Damani on the French website Jeune Afrique. World Crunch followed up with a derisive article on April 4th, 2017. Also on April 4th, as mentioned on businessnews.com.tn, on April 2nd, former Tunisian Astronomical Society President Hafed Atib, quote, challenged Professor Jamel Taur to broadcast a copy of the thesis, end quote. On April 5th, a blog runs this headline, quote, Amira Karoubi is the laughingstock of the academic world by arguing that the earth is flat, end quote. They actually printed the word academic twice. It's not my mistake. Translated from French, that was their repeated word. This is followed up by the scathing op-ed, which appears on April 10th, 2017, published by Nidal Guessem, a professor of physics and astronomy at the American University of Sharjah, and as we mentioned, a former postdoc researcher at the Goddard Space Center, according to his Wikipedia page. Interestingly, back in 2001, Guessem tells us he gave lectures against the idea that the moon landing was faked, entitled, quote, Did NASA fake the moon landing, or are we miserably failing to educate the public, end quote. On April 11th, two weird press releases are issued, here and here, on websites which do not appear legitimate. This one, which was published on an Italian website called www.6.ansa.it, has a hideous picture of a globe and a measly paragraph carrying the story with no references, which purports to function as a press update, indicating on April 11th in Tunis, the Ministry of Higher Education has officially announced that, quote, the National School of Engineers of Sfax rejected a thesis based on religious assertions supporting a flat earth theory, end quote. Trouble is, this doesn't look like a press release. It's some anonymous little info blurb. It has no author, and what's more telling, this same article is published at www.ansamed.info on the same date. Also on April 11th, a user named MacroBR444s posts on chess.com linking the op-ed by Guessem to the FAW press releases on ansa.it and ansamed.info. A curious pattern of cyber chess appears to be forming. What's more interesting, ANSA is an anagram for NASA. ANSA is an anagram for NASA. On April 19th, 2017, the same article by Guessem appears under a generic name, FEMA Newsroom, on this website in Greece. By the way, these are all hyperlinks that undergird this article. If you'd like to read them, buy the book and scroll through the chapter and click on the links while you listen to me narrate. There'll be a link in the description below. If you don't want to buy it, you get the audio version. On April 19th, 2017, the same article by Guessem appears under a generic author name, FEMA Newsroom, on this website in Greece. Go figure. On April 20th, an Italian news article, authored by Ursula Riva, mentions the thesis and goes on to discuss Neil Armstrong and moon landing deniers, seemingly equating flat Earth theory with Guessem's earlier work. On April 21st, 2017, Huffington Post's Italian branch covers it too, saying that Professor Taur said, quote, the student had been encouraged by some American researchers who have sent the NASA publications, end quote. Hold the phone. You mean this whole thing started because American researchers sent the student, in this case Amira Karoubi, whether or not she is veridical, NASA publication? That appears rather convenient, does it not? That the professor, I mean, imagine you're this professor. You've been working with a student for 5 years on her thesis, right? And then as soon as you present the thesis, you publish an unapproved, non-peer-reviewed, shitty misspelled draft online, and then the guy who purportedly read it asks you if he could see a copy of the paper. You tell him, you don't need to see a copy of the paper, you know the title. That's all on April 2nd. Mind you, it got published on April 1st on yampu.com. And then on April 3rd, this media shitstorm smear campaign starts. And then the professor of this student, who had to have authenticated or validated her research back in 2011 for the PhD to even move forward, says that, quote, the student had been encouraged by some American researchers who have sent the NASA publications, end quote. To me, that seems to be basically trying to tie this theoretical PhD to flat earthers in the US. It seems rather overt. That appears rather convenient, does it not? So here's how this drama is playing out. Allegedly back in August of 2016, this preliminary results paper gets published. Nobody saw that. It wasn't online. It was published in a pay-to-play journal. For 8 months, nobody says peep about it. Nothing. But suddenly, at the beginning of April 2017, it conveniently gets republished on yampu.com right at the beginning of a mega shitstorm caused by Professor Taur that streams through the high halls of Tunisian government, academia, news media, and scientific organizations, such as the Tunisian Astronomical Society. As to whether Professor Jamel Taur really did oversee a flat earth PhD thesis since 2011 or not, remains unknown. Forgive some of the typos. These are essays that I wrote rather quickly. Whether or not the PhD thesis was actually overseen since 2011 or not remains unknown. If so, why can't anyone read it? And why was its preliminary results paper published in a shitty pay-to-play online journal and published auspiciously close to the inception of this smear campaign? Furthermore, why did the Tunisian Astronomical Society reprint most of it on their Facebook page? Sounds more like promotion than cover-up. I mean, if this was really an incendiary, scientifically undergirded thesis that was shaking the halls of science and academia, do you really think the Tunisian Astronomical Society would jump at the opportunity to repaste it all over their Facebook page? No, man, they would have covered this up. It wouldn't have hit a single news rag. Take a look at what's happening here. All right. So what's in this alleged thesis? Well, in summation, from the materials that have been divulged, the PhD claims, quote, with regard to the known physical laws, we have rejected the laws of Newton, Kepler, and Einstein, seen weaknesses of their foundations, and proposed instead a new vision of the kinematics of objects conforming to the verses of the Quran. The speed of light and sound are thus recalculated, and their speeds are shown to correspond to the order of 1.43109 kilometers per second, 88 miles per second, or 3,201 miles per hour. The Big Bang Theory and universal expansion were also rejected, end quote. The PhD candidate concludes that, quote, all the data and the physical religious arguments have made it possible to demonstrate the central position, the fixation and the flattening of the surface of the Earth, and the revolution of the sun and moon around it, end quote. According to Professor Taur, and roughly translated from French, quote, the student I enclosed wanted to review the theory of the gravitation of the Earth around the sun, proposing the inverse hypothesis. It's just a rough draft, end quote. Taur holds the highest rank in academia, that of professor. Here's a list of articles Jamel Taur's work has been cited in. Now granted, from the outset it appears that Professor Jamel Taur, quote, stands by his student, end quote, defending both of their constitutional rights to freedom of thought and academic freedom, complaining that for this constitutional exercise he is now the object of a malicious campaign damaging his reputation and his scientific skills. This feels fairly plausible from a surface level glance, and initially my heart went out to Professor Jamel Taur, who amidst heavy academic volatility defends himself by recalling that the Constitution guarantees freedom of thought and academic freedom. But now it appears as this PhD flat earth narrative is designed to create a mold for what that type of thinking looks like. In other words, it may be your constitutional freedom to be completely stupid and the laughingstock of all of academia and social society. Are you following? We can view this from how it gets treated in the public domain. Flat earth equals Muslim equals bad, or flat earth equals anti-evolution equals stupid, or flat earth equals no way PhD. Notice how flat earth wasn't equated with Christianity, which it is frequently today. Is there a religious angle brewing? As mentioned on April 20th when Ursula Riva covered it in the Italian news rag Corriere della Sera, the piece as a whole reads more than any other like a scripted and tactical op-ed, making a synonym of Islam and flat earth, citing constitutional arguments in the light of science denial, and creating a referent for future issues by insinuating that the very idea of questioning the Masonic greats like Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton is blasphemous. In this case, to the Ministry of Education of Tunisia, the faculty at the University of Sfax, and the local newspapers like Al Maghrib, but the point stands as, or wherever for that matter. The objective here appears to be setting a standard for the implacability of these scientific greats and the ludicrousness of debunking any of their claims. See Tesla's opinion of Einstein's theory of relativity, for one. Note, this is a fabricated narrative with real players. The degree to which each one may or may not have known the paper is not real remains debatable. If the paper is a hoax, then certainly Professor Jamel Taur is a primary perpetrator of deception. Furthermore, Dr. Hafed Atib, former president of the Tunisian Astronomical Society, is most likely also in on it, as evidenced by the fact that he had not read the paper on April 2nd when asking Taur if he could view its contents, and then perfectly on cue on April 3rd, the Tunisian Astronomical Society has a full condemning statement on the matter published on Facebook. In other words, he asked the guy for the paper, and then the next day he's got a full retort published on Facebook. Pretty quick. You ever tried to read a PhD? Furthermore, the Tunisian Astronomical Society is interwoven with the mechanisms of NASA, as shown in this post. These hyperlinks are what augment and undergird these essays, as shown in this post on April 12, 2017. Just to spare you the suspense, the Tunisian Astronomical Society's Facebook page is all buddy-buddy with NASA events and NASA paraphernalia and so forth. Just to show that there's a partnership there. I think it's clearly demonstrated if you follow the as shown in this post link, published April 12th, 2017. Fawzi Sharfi, Secretary General to the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research, assisted, knowingly or unknowingly, with outrage from the governmental sector. Zaid Krishain, editor of Al Maghrib, cried out for the popular news outlets, and Chokri Mahmoudi, academic specialist in management at the University of Sfax, had a speaking part on behalf of the University of Sfax itself. It would not be necessary for any of them to know it was a fake in order to engender those reactions, although it would seem more likely that the fluidity and timing of their dissent was enabled by collusion. Even more tertiary to those main players, and most likely out of the loop, would be the journalists that ran the stories, like Frida Damani and Ursula Riva, with Nidhal Gessam seemingly operated as a hired gun, with Nidhal Gessam, the former postdoc NASA researcher, seemingly operating as a hired gun, having ran damage control on moon truthers a decade prior. Interestingly, Professor Jamal Tawour seems to be doing real research and really did say, quote, "The student may have been encouraged by some American researchers whom sent the NASA publications," end quote. Fawzia Sharfi quoted in the article written by Frida Damani on Jeune Afrique as saying, quote, "In reference to the university thesis that the earth is flat, it is indignant. How can we accept that the university is not the space of knowledge, scientific rigor, but that of negation of science, the one where science is refused because it does not conform to Islam," end quote. The article published in early April is already referenced in Sharfi's Wikipedia entry. Look for citation on the article written by Damani, and includes her quote equating Islam and flat earth. So we know all these characters and what they do and where they do it. The only character that remains hidden is the female author of this PhD thesis. And who is the author of this thesis? Perhaps Miss Rivas unintentionally gives us a hint as to who may be the grand designer of this false narrative, why there is a slim digital imprint for the student, why she wasn't reported as present on April 2nd, 2017, and why such top brass in the academic, scientific, and civic sectors weighed in so quickly. And lastly, why former NASA employees are writing op-eds that disclose the thesis was leaked, his quotes, not mine, to a former president of the Tunisian Astronomical Association, which we already learned was the Tunisian Astronomical Society, which we've discovered by contacting them and confirming through them was Dr. Hafed Atib, who asked for a copy of the paper, but whom Gessam said it had been leaked to. And moreover, why flat earth is being equated with fundamental Islam, reads other, enemy, terrorist, and why the whole thing went down in fuck nowhere Tunisia, in the closing paragraph of her article, published on April 20th, 2017. Miss Rivas writes, "Even today in America, and to us." First of all, what a weird fucking way to start out. If you're writing in Italy or Tunisia, I believe she's writing for the Italian rag here, so in Italy, "Even today in America, and to us." I mean, it just sounds like someone that's writing from the US. Quote, "Even today in America, and to us, there are those who doubt that Neil Armstrong has done a really small step for man and one giant leap for mankind landing on the moon." So this is what we're getting at. The target is people that don't think we went to the moon. While the truth is that Copernicus and Galileo I may have misquoted her here because this isn't reading right. So forgive this sentence. While the truth is that Copernicus and Galileo that has not yet touched the ground in much of the United States. So, I mean, what that reads is, well, she's saying, while the truth is we went to the moon, and that hasn't touched the ground in much of the United States. According to a survey carried out 3 years ago by the National Science Foundation, 1 in 4 Americans, we are talking about almost 80 million people, just does not know that the Earth orbits the sun, end quote. So the overwhelming presentation by Ms. Rivas here is that moon landing deniers and NASA critics are the ones whom corrupted the young student's mind. Remember that Professor Jamal Tawour said that American researchers sent the young student the NASA publications, and that they are just one of many dumb Americans that don't know that the Earth goes around the sun. The narrative being sprayed to the Italian public is, don't deny the great scientists. Nay, how could Copernicus, Kepler, Newton, and Einstein be questioned? Only by stupid Americans who don't know the Earth orbits the sun, and whom fed this researcher the NASA publications, and whom still doubt that Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, could such ideas arise. Do you see how this is neatly folding together? Perhaps now you understand why Professor Tawour mentioned the student had been contacted by American researchers whom sent the NASA publications. How all of these little components, the leaked thesis, the yumpu.com article, the governmental outrage, the scientific outrage, the academic outrage, the involvement of Fawzia Sharfi, Zaid Krishain, and Hafed Ateb, the ANSA websites linked on chess.com, the FEMA newsroom reprint of Gessam's op-ed, the filiality between the Tunisian Astronomical Society and NASA, the reference to moon landing deniers in an Italian newspaper, the conflation of flat earth with fundamental Islam by Sharfi, the science denial argument dressed up in a weak constitutional outfit by Professor Taour, and from the very people whom were instrumental in the reformation of the Tunisian constitution back in 2011 and 2012, such as Taour and Krishin, are folding together to create one gigantic false narrative. Why the journalist Rivas sounds like a mouthpiece for NASA, even today in America and to us. There are those who doubt that Neil Armstrong has done a really small step for man and one giant leap for mankind landing on the moon, end quote, weaving the narrative that only dumb Americans think we didn't land on the moon, and that even more dumb Americans don't believe we go around the sun. Why is Gessam, who ran damage control on moon landing deniers back in 2001, publishing an article which gets tons of shares and reprinted under a pseudonym on a website in Greece, which contains a link at its bottom back to the real source on golfnews.com. The final point here is that the constitutional and academic freedom Professor Taour spoke of is being hammered down by the scientism narrative that nobody can question our place in the universe, especially related to the Earth orbiting around the sun, without experiencing a serious witch hunt. But the witch in this hunt does not even appear to exist, and the wizards that fabricated this paper did so knowing full well the pro-scientism PR campaign it would engender. A few questions in closing. Why all the hullabaloo of a rough draft that proposes the inverse hypothesis to the notion that the Earth goes around the sun? Why was this thesis purportedly leaked to a former president of the Tunisian Astronomical Society, who then asked for a copy of it, as if he hadn't received it? And then the professor replied, the title should be sufficient. Why did Dr. Hafed Atib get leaked a copy of the thesis, but also ask to see a copy of the thesis on April 2nd? And if he received it in the evening of April 2nd, how was the Tunisian Astronomical Society able to refute it on the 3rd? Doesn't a PhD thesis take more than an evening to rebut? Moreover, why is Professor Jamel Taour claiming that he is, quote, the object of a malicious campaign damaging his reputation and scientific skills, when in actuality he's claiming his student's thesis has no scientific proof for its claims? Why is the Secretary General to the Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research intimately involved in debunking a rough draft? Why did all these people wait 8 months since the time of the purported preliminary results publication in August 2016 and then suddenly take off in unison like a pack of hounds? Remember, Taour claimed they came at him like a pack of dogs. Why are Zaid Krishain and Chokri Mamogil poignantly vocal on this issue? But most of all, why a flurry of activity around a paper that was quoted from heavily but was never a vetted thesis? That is, it was never actually submitted for review, and which may not even have a real author and has never even been shared with the public. The persecution of the alleged Amira Karoubi was nothing less than a modern-day witch hunt upon a fictitiously designed character or a willingly known accomplice. The falsified Flat Earth PhD thesis was mainly an ideological plant to get out in front of any religious flat earthers and comb the narrative as one of science denial and fundamental idiocy. When, as has been shown herein, flat earth theorists are neither specifically religious nor a-religious, neither one age group versus another, nor one socioeconomic class opposed to another. It is a hybrid, omni-national, polypolitical, zetetically centered group of curious, intelligent, and dauntless individuals. Gessam also mentioned in his hired gun piece that the student had previously finished top of her class before attending university, with no reference to the school. If she was so smart, a top-of-the-class type attitude, do you not think we would hear the roar of her spiritual and scientific groundbreaking perceptions? Would she not rise up amidst the rabble-rousing and state her case as the cool, calm, and collected geology post-grad researcher that they claim she was? Do you think this alleged Amiri Karoubi, a purported fundamental Islamic researcher vetted by the University of Suffolk School of Engineering, would spend 5 years working on a thesis only to release a shitty preliminary results paper and then allow your professor, whom oversaw the thesis, to say that it had no scientific proof for any of its claims? What was he doing overseeing it? Do you now see the illogical procession of events? Perhaps Amiri Karoubi has the answers, if she would just reply to my Facebook messages. You've been listening to Spiritual Norse Flatlandia, Chapter 8. If you like what you hear, click the link below, cop it on Amazon. Drop this video a like, maybe share it. Bless up.